may I request all of you to please be seated. It's time for us to begin with our lead panel this afternoon. So, there was a time when India was hugely divided in terms of the development model that the nation must adopt. While there's been a fair bit of consensus to further economic reforms, oftentimes we'd see that political gains appear to take priority over a set national agenda. As the election year brings in a lot of anxiety in terms of leadership, our lead panel this afternoon discuss about what it takes to build a resilient India. To moderate this session, ladies and gentlemen, which is brought to you by Jindal Panther TMT Rebars, the future of construction, I'd like to invite on stage Outlook Business Executive Editor, Mr. V. Keshavdev. Thank you very much for joining us. And of course, it's time to invite our lead panel on stage, and let's do that with a warm round of applause. Member of Congress, Mr. Milind Deora. Also joining us is BJP spokesperson, Ms. Shaina NC.
Politicians first, and then it goes.
Next up on our lead panel is Chairman, Bharat, Krishak, Samaj, Mr. Ajay, Jakhar. Also joining us on this panel is Advisor to Rajasthan CM, Mr. Arvind Mayaram. Next up, we have Chairman and CEO, Edelweiss Group, Mr. Rashesh Shah. And joining us is Economist and former Finance Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Mr. Haseeb Drabu. Mr. Keshavdev, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, and a very warm welcome to all my panelists for taking time out to be at our event. I know we are kind of running behind schedule. We'll keep it short and sweet. But we need to have our pound of flesh. So, holding a session after lunch is usually a most challenging one. But I think with an eclectic panel that we have today and an equally interesting topic, my job is a lot getting it. It will be much more easier, I think. So while I said this is a big debate, making a resilient India, so we are not going to engage in a slanging match as we are seen on TV, but this is our prime time. So I am not looking for an healthy consensus. We are looking for healthy disagreements. So at least that could kind of suffice up. So just to put in the context, in some sense, the first 40 years post-independence, the country just meandered trying to get a sense of where its future lay. But it was only after 1991 did we really see India break through the so-called Hindu rate of growth and emerge as one of the fastest growing economies of the world. Even so, while our per capita has gone up nearly sevenfold from 1991 to nearly $2,000, we haven't somewhere really realized our true potential. The same old issues remain. Social development indicators are not up there. Unemployment, poverty, healthcare, education still remains a challenge. We have achieved independence, but we have become slaves of foreign capital. Neither are we self-sufficient in energy, nor have we emerged as an agriculture powerhouse. So, in putting that into context, and also I had attended one event where I got to hear Lord Meghna Desai, and he said there is, in some sense, there is no difference between the economic ideologies of all parties. They have some kind of an khichdi ideology of which way things have to go. In a lighter vein, he had said that BJP is Congress plus cow, so hence its mathematical equivalent will be Congress is BJP minus cow. So
I think Congress is BJP maybe minus cow minus demonetization.
Okay. So here we go. So let's get off a cracker of a start. So let me start off with Shaina first. Do you believe that the BJP, what the BJP has to offer as a nation, as an economic agenda, is very different from what the Congress has offered over the years?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look at the kind of policies which have been implemented, and when I say implemented, on ground. You take Jan Dhan Yojana, for example. Did rural India ever think they would be part of the main banking sector? And in these numbers, you take Mudra Banking, which has helped over 70% of its loans given to women as entrepreneurs across the length and breadth of this country. You ask the women sitting in the audience and you ask them through Ujjwala, how many of them have got 6.5 crore gas cylinders? And the kind of schemes, whether it is even women-centric, our views on pregnancy, our views on Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the kind of sanitation available today in rural India, all of that makes the economy. So I'm not going to limit economy just to figures of GDP, inflation. You have experts here who will also have their own say. But you talked about demonetization, a courageous decision which single-handedly did away with terror funding, all kinds of mafia, all kinds of cross-border terrorism, and we've been able to achieve through our policy, not just in India, but even overseas, a name and brand value for brand India, which is probably the first time in the history.
But on demon, since the topic is already hot, so hasn't the narrative kind of kept changing within BJP itself? First it was black money, then it said that it was about, because the whole money came back into the system, it said that now we have got a lot more taxpayers, the base has gone up. So it's been that what was...
But those figures are in the public domain. Look at the amount of taxpayers you have now vis-a-vis before demonetization. It is all for people to know and people to gauge, and we can sit here and continue to deliberate on statistics. But I think the fundamental is you have infrastructure projects which are growing at a vast speed. If you look at the amount of roads constructed in the previous government to what is happening now, you will realize that the delivery is there to be seen. Likewise, when we talk about corruption, what was the reason the previous government was ousted out? Obviously, scam after scam after scam. Here, you have only baseless allegations floating as political repartee, but this is the first Prime Minister who has genuinely walked the talk. So I think on multiple accounts we have delivered. Of course, there are a lot many that we would want to deliver. We talk about farmers even, but if you look at the electoral kind of results in Mandsaur, it shows you that people do believe that there is scope for improvement, but we trust a government that has delivered on the ground.
So where do you think the three assembly election results, what went wrong? If everything was fine for BJP, what was...
No, but if you actually look at the assembly results, after 15 years to win in itself is a victory in any state. In Madhya Pradesh, we lost about 20 seats with less than 100 votes. In Rajasthan, yes, every 5 years you have a change of guard, but that does not mean that we did badly. We did fairly well. Again, there was a few seats which we lost by a couple thousand votes. And yes, Chhattisgarh, I do believe that was a referendum that people wanted a change, and rightfully so in a democracy. You win some, you lose some, but you don't seem to be talking in 2014 when BJP took over with 6 states, today at 16. Is that not something to talk about too?
Okay. Milind, you have been Minister of State for Information Technology, and Congress has been a good part of India's history. They have run the governments. But do you believe somewhere BJP has managed to articulate its economic agenda or vision much better than the Congress over the years?
See, firstly, when we spoke before as well, I didn't want to make it a BJP versus Congress issue, but
it's an election year, obviously.
I mean, I'm happy to, but I feel going beyond Congress, BJP, and I'm not a spokesperson of my party. I voluntarily chose not to be a spokesperson of my party because I think it's a very difficult job to be a spokesperson of your party. I like to be much more candid and say where we're wrong. The way I look at it is, look, it took us in our 2 terms of UPA 1 and 2, it took us about 8 years, the last quarter really, of UPA 1 and 2 for things to unravel, for things to go wrong. There were a lot of economic headwinds coming in internationally. Oil prices were extremely high, a lot of other problems. But I do accept that in the last quarter of our 10-year term, we started to make a lot of mistakes. And as a result of that, we failed to communicate a lot of our achievements. When BJP came to power in 2014, and again, I'm not speaking as a congressman, I'm speaking as, let's say, a lay investor in the markets today. I had a lot of expectations from this government. I thought that this is the first government in 30 years of India's history that has a majority. I thought they could do a lot with regards to disinvesting loss-making PSUs. Maybe I misunderstood the statement, minimum government, maximum governance. I thought it would mean you'll liberalize and move in the way that Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh did. Today, almost 5 years into the term of this government, and I'm saying this across the board, everyone I speak to, from large industrial houses to MSMEs to traders, if you look at the business mood in the country, there are certain sectors that are doing well. There are certain sectors that have a lot of distress because of legacy issues and many other problems. But it's in my 15 years that I've been in politics, I've never seen the business climate or the business sentiment this dampened. And when I say that, regardless of what my friend Rashesh may say about the capital markets and public equities, today every promoter I meet, every entrepreneur I meet, is either very afraid to speak out in public. Today, for instance, I'll tell you, when I saw Mr. Piyush Goyal walking out, and he's a close friend of mine, I screamed his name. I said, Piyush, and I joked with him. I said, I'm the only one allowed to scream your name, your first name in public. Everyone else is too scared to do so. And he says, why should they be scared? But the reality is people are afraid to speak about what's happening. Now, demonetization, Shaina is a dear friend of mine, an old friend of mine. Every friend of mine in BJP, including ministers in the government, are laughing at the decision of demonetization. I think they're all saying privately that we can't understand why this happened. Yes, they have to defend it. She's a spokesperson. Her duty is to defend it. But that mood of being afraid of the government, of not being able to tell the government what's wrong in its policies, I think has created the biggest problem for this government. Today, if you look at tax terrorism, we were accused of tax terrorism, and I do agree that the income tax department, CBDT, is a machine on its own. There was a saying by Max Weber, who's a well-known political theorist, and he says, no matter who you vote for, the government always gets in. The same applies to the tax department. But today, tax terrorism is at an all-time high. Now, let's be realistic here. Today, businessmen who are operating on the ground, they are coming to me and saying that when UPA was in power, at a local level, corruption existed. But they're saying today corruption, let's say at the tax department level, has gone up by 5x, 6x, 7x, 10x. Now they're afraid to say it. It's my duty to say this. Because I think it's important for some kind of course correction. It's too late in the day now. Now in May, June, we'll have a new government in place. But I really believe that this government, and again I repeat my point, as a lay investor, they blew a godsend opportunity where they could have done a hell of a lot in this country to liberalize the economy, to follow the trajectory that Vajpayee had begun, that Manmohan Singh took forward. Keep in mind, Vajpayee government had 180 MPs in parliament. They only had about 90 MPs to make their coalition come to power. In 2004, Congress got 145 seats. We had 60 MPs from the left supporting us. In spite of that, massive liberalization in a sector like aviation, a strong push towards reforms like GST, liberalization, selling of loss-making PSUs. Rashesh and I were chatting about it earlier. We always talk about, a coalition government versus a majority government, which one is better for markets, which one is better for business. In 2004 to 2009, the Nifty companies, their average earnings grew by about 10%, 18%. 2009, Rashesh, to 2014, the average earnings growth of Nifty companies was about 10%. Today, in the last 4.5, 5 years, the average earnings of Nifty companies is about 1%. Now, keep in mind, we had massive headwinds. We had high oil prices. We had the 2008 financial crisis. Again, I'm repeating, we had 60 MPs from the left supporting our government, creating all kinds of havoc. This was a majority government. This government had low oil prices, massive tailwinds, And I really believe they blew it.
So like you said, that 2009 to 2014 was a challenge. But what we saw, like you said, despite major headwinds, you kind of managed to pull on. But what we saw post was the entire NPA crisis in the banking system. So would it be fair in some sense to say that the government really blew it up, though you had that, but you couldn't really do. The economic cycle itself was not private capex. The confidence levels of the private sector in their own business was not heavy. So how much could the government spur on its own?
Now, I'll give you an example. Now, you're talking about NPA crisis, for instance. One of the biggest contributors to NPAs in India is the telecommunications sector. Now, you said, Milind, you were a Minister of State in the Ministry of Telecommunications and IT. I can tell you from 2011 to 2014, I would work out of Sanchar Bhavan, which is the Department of Telecommunications headquarters. On a daily basis, there were 30, 40 journalists wanting to take a bite about something that had happened. The political rhetoric in our country was so polarized. 2G, there may have been issues with 2G. The special court absolved everyone of any crime, any criminal action. It's pending an appeal. Let's see what happens with that appeal. The decision to not auction spectrum and to say that spectrum should be bundled with the license to keep teledensity high and keep prices low was not a decision taken by us. It was a decision taken by Atal Bihari Vajpayee when he was Prime Minister and by Arun Shuri in 2003. We continued that decision. We failed to communicate that decision. That's a separate issue. I admit at that point. But the rhetoric became so shrill in our country that as a result of that, can you imagine a decision on whether to auction spectrum or not was not taken by the cabinet. It was not taken by Department of Telecommunications. It was not taken by the Telecom Commission of India. It was not taken by TRAI, which is the regulator. It was not taken by Parliament, by cabinet, as I said. It was taken by the Supreme Court of India. And that will obviously throw any businesses, any telco's business model, it'll throw a spanner into the works. So, I mean, I'm just making a larger point. It's not about Congress versus BJP. And I think that it's very important that regardless of which party comes to power in 2019, and I can assure you the jury is out on what will happen, that on certain issues of economic importance, we have to work together as a country. Because I really believe that an issue like joblessness is not an issue of Congress or BJP. It's an issue of national importance. Just like when someone we met in the United States who's a former member of the White House, the cabinet, he said to us, when you talk of pluralism and you talk of keeping communities together, you all talk about it as a humanitarian issue, but it's actually India's national security issue. And I think that our track record, even as an opposition in that sense, there's always politics and things happen. But, when BJP came to power and the insurance bill was pending before Parliament, which we were trying to push incidentally and they were opposing, we worked with the government to see it through very quickly. GST also, unlike the government, the BJP, which was opposing it for over a decade, we worked with the government to see it through. We may have had differences on GST, that's a different issue. No, we've not opposed it. We may have differences in terms of this. So I think that in some areas, people have to come together. And I would say that the best thing that this government has done and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has done, in spite of his election rhetoric, which was anti-Aadhaar, anti-GST, he's gone ahead and implemented those schemes.
Rashesh, what's your take on how the government, you said that keep me out of politics, but I have to drag you in.
No, I think, I think India is a very complex country. And over the last 25 years, we have seen, since the economic liberalization, there is always a large agenda in front of every government. They get a few things done. So if you ask me, every government for the last 25 years, there are a lot of achievements which are there. And there are a lot of opportunities also which they could not capitalize on. So it's ultimately a mix of good and bad. And as I was earlier saying, the interesting thing about India is we sit and we analyze and we pontificate and all that. But if you look at the GDP growth rate, last 25 years, the average GDP growth rate of India has been about 7% for 25 years. The CAGR of 20-year growth is also 7%. The CAGR of 10-year growth is also 7%. And the CAGR for 5 years is also 7%.
So you're
So
referring
over
to
the last 25 years, various governments, various coalition, majority governments have been there. A lot of good things have happened. Also, at least what I've seen, a lot of the policies that governments undertake, the results of that actually outlive them. So maybe an earlier government did a few things which got benefited out here. The actions of this government will actually result in that. So to link economic outcomes directly with government is not always the smart thing to do. Also, something as simple as oil price can change the dynamic. We saw last quarter until October, everything looked gloom doom when oil price became $80. And when oil price fell by 30% in a month, suddenly India was again, starting to look good again. So there are so many dynamics out there that to just link economy and politics is not always easy. I've always believed that economy and markets have a cadence of their own, which goes on. And if you go back and see last 25 years, things happen, economy happened. Like the period from 1989 to 94 was a very turbulent period for India. We had the Babri Masjid, we had the Mandal Commission, we had the oil price and the BOP crisis, we had the Harsha Mehta scam, all of that. The stock market went up from 800 to 4,400 in those 6 years, where we had all those things were happening. India was having balance sheet crisis and all, balance of payment crisis. So economies work at their own cadence. Governments can add or subtract a little bit. So I believe that India, we are at 7%. Bad government policies can take it down to say 5.5, 6. And good government policies can take us up to 8.5. And that is why we need good government policies. But it can only impact within the range. Outside of that, the economy, because of the local consumption, the local savings, we save about 28% of our GDP, $700 billion. So earlier you spoke something about slaves of foreign capital. It is not any longer true. India is actually now capital surplus. We have household savings which are so high, but we have to convert those savings into investments. How do we convert our savings into long-term investment? We have a lot of structural flaws in that, but foreigners have given us about 20, 30, 40 billion dollars a year, while India now saves about $700 billion a year. So we have a lot of savings, our consumption, our investment needs, all of them have made us a very robust economy. Things like oil price and all impact us, but outside of that, we are very, very strong. We just need good policies to take what is currently a 7% to 8.5%.
So since you have focused a lot on the GDP part of the data, so are you referring to the old series or the new series? It doesn't really matter.
Actually, I would say we all use, GDP and stock market, but these are just very crude indicators or easy to refer indicators and all. I think the more underlying important thing is jobs. And yeah, a 7% GDP will create X amount of jobs, a 8% may create some more jobs. So ultimately, but unfortunately, we don't have data on jobs. I wish I could sit here and say that under X government, so many jobs got created, under Y government, so many jobs got created. That would be the true indicator of how good the policies are. GDP is, as I said, impacted by so many things. But in the absence of anything else, we have to use that. And old series and new series, I think that is also part of the media amplification. As I always say is...
It's the CSO amplification, it's not the media amplification.
It's like, it's like I would always say that India is a very chaotic country. In a lot of, there was an RBI governor who once made a statement that in every country the future is uncertain. In India, the past is also uncertain. Because we don't know, what was the real growth. But having said that there are issues, but I think we can amplify them and lose the sight of the main issue. So the main issue is we've been growing as 7, maybe 6.5, maybe 7.5. But the point is we are, I would say, stuck in this zone. We were earlier at, say, Hindu rate of growth of about 2%. It became 3%. Then we became 4% in the 80s. After economic liberalization, we are at about 7. But we are stuck in 7 over 25 years now. If we do few things right, we can go to 8, 9, maybe 10%. Those things are achievable. And I think the idea is to start talking how to get there. And not focus too much on whether the 7 is 7 or it's 6.88?
Haseeb, you have been part of the Planning Commission and you were also a banker. Then you joined politics and you were also the finance minister of J&K. So if you encompass your entire kind of learnings or your understanding of where do you think we as an economy has got it right and where do you think we are going wrong?
Well,
And does politics have a real influence on the way the growth trajectory of India goes?
Look, I think it's very important to have a political direction for economic policy. Economics is not economics, it's political economy. And you cannot dissociate politics from economics. I was very surprised to hear the BJP spokesperson talk about, BJP's policy, economic policy. Today it is undifferentiated policy. BJP has moved from Swadeshi to liberalization as much as Congress moved from socialism to globalization. Post 1991, there is only one kind of economic policy. It's a good thing in some ways because it's a consensus economic policy. It's a bad thing in many ways because you're now stuck with that. There is no differential policy coming in. We have seen things like, the first Mayaram plan, which was about socialism, then we moved to redistribution with growth, then growth with redistribution. Now, none of these things are coming out in the economic policy making. So even as the consensus just about seems to be breaking, which is dangerous, broadly, directionally speaking, we are in the right direction, but we do need politically enlightened economic policy making. Otherwise, politics is degenerating into issues that are detrimental. Today, there is no differentiation in economic policy between BJP and Congress, to take two large parties. It is Lux and Liril. My soap has this much, your soap has this much. There's no major change in terms of how do you want to address the issue. Distributional issues have been put on the back burner. Look at the way NPA crisis is handled. It's the same thing that has been done. You can forever blame each other. Fact of the matter is that 1991 was path-breaking. Post that, economic thinking has stagnated. Political input into policy making has not been done. As a consequence of which, to do product differentiation, you start inventing things, whether it gets into vigilantism of cows or whatever, and bulls and buffaloes. Much more serious attention needs to be given to differentiate economic policy. That's one. Second, there cannot be one economic policy for India. India is 30 economies at different levels of development, different requirements, different resource bases. Now, you did this in the 60s, 70s, and 80s through one instrument called public investment. You were handling Odisha at some level of disbursement, Maharashtra at another level. All that is over now. Center, we are just in fact discussing with Mr. Gopalakrishnan. Center has done its bit in 91, macroeconomics is all in order. To start focusing on what's happening at the states. You have immense potential. You need diversity of that. We struggled as finance minister to look at saying that, why do I want to do all these schemes they were talking about, All these schemes are old schemes, rebranded. Every single one of them. Nothing is new. Whether APDRP is now being named Ujala. Does that make a difference? No, it doesn't make a difference. So we want specific things. We struggled and said, why can't I do a UBI in J&K? Small population, total 18 lakh under the poverty line. Why am I spending 4,000 crores, doing all kinds of social welfare measures? Why don't I do 1 lakh per family per year and resolve the issue? That flexibility is not available today. So if you want to build a resilient India, if you want politically enlightened economic policy, you must look at states. Allow states to do things that they feel are right and not overcentralize it. Now you look at the union budget. I was just looking at some numbers. 70% of union budget expenditure is online lending to states and others. They spend only 30%. Post GST, what is the role of union budget? Virtually nothing in direct taxes. Only direct taxes. Indirect taxes, nothing. The finance minister today is a 12th man in the cricket team. GST council decides what happened to indirect taxes. Only direct taxes left. Expenditure 70% is done by states. Now with the finance commission coming in, it will go to panchayats also. So none of this is being reflected in the economic policy making mindset of the country. And that is where focus needs to be done, which is where you will start grounds up economic policy. Forget the notion of India as one economy. In terms of economic market, yes. But for policy purposes, look at the second tier of governance. That is where the action will lie.
Arvind, you are part of the finance ministry. You have seen the pre and post liberalization. So is there more onus on the civil service or the bureaucracy to frame policies and, to achieve, in some sense, the economic agenda for the country? Because governments come and go, but it is you who are going to be there and driving the policies. So how much of it is on your shoulders and how much of that is on the politicians' shoulders?
I think we need to be very clear that in a democracy, the policy direction has to be political. In whichever country the policy direction has come from bureaucracy, democracies have floundered. Pakistan is a classic example. When I say bureaucracy, it includes the army because they're all professionals who are doing this. So I don't think it's a very good, belief that bureaucracies do better policies than politicians do. I don't think it's correct. I also believe that in a country like India, we move incrementally in a direction. We seldom see one kind of a revolutionary change in the manner in which economic thinking is done. In some ways it is good because stable economic policies are a good ground for investment. Investors look for long-term stability in policy space. But we need to also be clear that when political rhetoric becomes very loud, then one of the major victims is economic policy. Because then economy begins to be driven by politics. And that I don't think is good for the country. My sense is that since 91, politics was driven by economy, but we are more and more seeing increasingly reverse happening, which I think that is a trend we need to arrest if we really want to go from 7% to 9% or 10%. Economic policy making should get into the heart of politics. And I think that is when we will see the real growth happening in the country.
So is BJP doing it better than the Congress?
Look, as a bureaucrat, I can tell you that there isn't much of a difference as far as economic policies are concerned. Very few people see this, but by 2010, 8 crore bank accounts had been opened of the people who were NREG registered, rural people. And they were all poor people. And all their wages were going into bank accounts. So there was a direct transfer already happening. So I'm saying this has been built upon. It has become much bigger in the new government. There cannot be any denying of it. But it isn't as if it never happened before. You see that between 2005 and 2012, 150 million people came out of poverty. This is World Bank report. And they came out of poverty, which was the fastest ever migration from poor to the middle class anywhere in the world in any time in history. So that's an achievement of economic policy that happened. So I'm just saying that there is a continuous movement in a particular direction which happens. Whether it's Congress, whether it is BJP or any other government, the direction of change is the same. We haven't deviated much from there. But of course, there are certain things that happen like demonetization, which makes the economy stumble. But of course, I think India has enough resilience to get up and move again going forward.
Ajay, you said that you wanted to hear out all the panelists and then make your comments. You represent the farmers' lobby, and every time there is a loan waiver, there is a hue and cry, and they remain a disgruntled lot. So why do you think we have lost our way in agriculture? Why is it that we still today face? I mean, 1990 incidentally happened to be the first time that farm loan waiver was done by UPC. And then it has been kind of a regular feature just for every state and government. So why do you think we have really gone wrong?
Hello, can you hear me? So I think I agree with what this side of the panel is saying is that there is no difference in economic policy, and I completely agree with them, because the economic policy of this country is inflation targeting, and the primary scapegoat is the farmer, that we will not let farm gate prices rise so that urban consumers are happy about it. And that is the crux of the problem. And it leads to around 10 to 15,000 farmers committing suicide every year for the last 20 years. There is no difference between political parties. Even political parties discount farmers. Panelists on this side, Congress and BJP, in their coterie, they have not a single farmer. 50% of India is not represented in the coterie of the leaders representing their parties. And that's the hard fact of life. And we can't run away from this, that political parties don't need farmer votes, and they discount it for whatever reasons, and the only targeting is inflation targeting, keeping prices low. Onion prices go up, exports are banned, X, Y, Z, it just goes on and on. Then there is a lot of hue and cry on this farm loan waiver, which is what you're asking, this is what everyone's discussing. I completely agree with you, like Confucius said, it's not the best of the best options. But these are exceptional times requiring exceptional steps to be taken. Now, when you decide if something is good or bad, you have to take it in relation to something else. So I'll just take it in relation to two things. And before I come to that, let me just say that, and I think both of you will agree, is that 70% of members of parliament and MLAs in the legislative assemblies do not get re-elected. The only permanent feature of the Indian democracy is the bureaucracy. And we are in this mess because of governance failure. And if you want resilience, because you'd ask me what is required for India's resilience, I think so we need to improve the quality of governance where delivery is. And that's the biggest hurdle this country faces. Now, the 7th Pay Commission was 2 years, I'm just giving you an example with farm loan waiver amount, which everyone is saying is going to be disastrous for this country, is a farm loan waiver of the kind my home state Punjab has done is of 2 lakh rupees per small and small and marginal farmers, amounts to something like less than 2 lakh crore rupees. It's a one-time cost. A 7th Pay Commission recommendation allows the bureaucracy, the plutocracy, I would say, that's what they are, 1.3 lakh crore rupees of annual pay increase. The average farmer's income in the country today is 75,000 rupees a year. And the 7th Pay Commission gives on an average of 1 lakh rupees per government servant as pay increase. Now you tell me, did any economist criticize the 7th Pay Commission? Did any bureaucracy, did any minister, any political party criticize 1,30,000 crore rupees as pay increase, which is 50% more than the annual salary income of a farmer? So I think so the narrative is wrong. We need to get it right again. And this is the problem. You have a debt recovery tribunal for the industry. What happens in an industrialist, for good reasons or bad reasons, his industry is not working, he goes to the debt recovery tribunal, and what does the DRT do? After 10, 15 years, your interest gets wiped out, you pay the original amount, and you walk home. But there is no tribunal like that for the farming community. If there was one, I think so no debt recovery, no farm loan waiver would be required. So we are playing by double rules, and there are different rules for different people, and that's why this crisis is coming up, and it's not going to go away with what's being proposed, because the implementation is not happening on the ground. And I completely agree that states must have more leeway to do what they want to do. I think so the central government has to give up control of policy, and they do it through financial measures, and it's a huge, huge burden, I think.
I just want Haseeb and Rashesh to both share their views on, how critical is it we address this agri issue, this farm loan waivers? Why have we not been able to get our head around? And why do you perennially end up having this easy way out of just doing the farm loan waivers?
No, see, this is where the original question of should economic policy get divorced from politics, which is what you started off with. I think this is truly the crux of it, that do you want this kind of populism to happen? It's more about electoral politics rather than political strategy of economic policy. Now these are compulsions that are bound to happen. Let's also not I have been on the other seat as well. I have done waivers. We did flood waivers because the entire
Political
state
compulsions?
not just political compulsions, because you are living in a real world, right? You're not, it's very easy to, I've been economic advisor. I advised against waivers. When I was finance minister, I was faced with a situation where there was complete distress. Floods had devastated J&K as much as Kerala happened today. You have distorted the architecture of GST by introducing a cess today, but for very good reason. So there are these areas where you have to understand that it's not about political compulsions. You're seeing it from the other side, from a corporate viewpoint or from pure play. These are real life situations you have to deal with. And that is what democracy is all about, because you're dealing with people. You're not dealing with statistics. So I do understand maybe it should be done better. There are moral hazard issues. Yes, I understand that. But you could perhaps evolve it better. There can be better design of the debt waiver so it doesn't become a moral hazard. There are situations that can be done. But what I would advise here is don't escape from it. And it's not something that, unless it's done like, in a hugely populist manner where it becomes competitive populism. Now Punjab does, let's see whether Haryana does. But if there are situations of distress, rural distress, that's one. Second, address the source of the problem. The source of the problem is lethargic banking by the banking sector. Despite having periodic sector lending targets for the last 40 years, what have people done? Given money to the institutions here, NABARD and others, for shortfalls in lending. Corporate lending, no issues. These kinds of lendings have never been done. So try and get out the banking sector into a mold for lending into agriculture at desirable rates and in a certain manner which facilitates that, which is where we tried the whole experiment of microfinancing and others. But perhaps you could redesign your entire cooperative banking sector is languishing. Your regional rural banks are lending. What you don't have today and needs to be created is a subnational financial architecture. That is dead. You are looking at these 10 banks and are expecting them to solve the India's problem. That's not going to happen. You need a much more granular fiscal architecture. For instance, why does this country look at a panchayat bank? If panchayats are the whole source of activity now, look at creating panchayat banks. Drop off all the cooperatives, merge the RRBs, get them financially empowered. Then you'll start the issue where you will not need farm loan waivers. Today, there are situations where you will need them. And as a political class, you will have to address them no matter what the finance minister says or the RBI governor says or the chairman of the bank says. These are realities you need to live with. Need to change the banking norms to be able to address it.
I just
Yeah.
want to comment on this. I'm working with Punjab government, and on this farm loan waiver, we had announced one, and I'll just give you the background of it. In 10 years, public sector banks and private banks gave 8 times the amount of crop loans that had versus 3.3% increase in productivity. So that's the kind of loaning that is not required. So when this private sector lending norms came into place, I think the banks had to give this money, and they went to irrigated farmers because nobody would go to rain-fed farmers and give money. They dumped all the money into irrigated tracts like Punjab. They forced everyone to take it. Now, an interesting part, because you're talking about banks, is now around 5,000 to 6,000 crores has, I think, so already been paid in Punjab. So at the Farmers Commission, we got the data of who's got how much loan. So we find that the loan waiver for private banks is 3 times that of cooperative banks and public sector banks. And that's why Punjab has told Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh not to include private sector banks into the picture, because these people have cooked up books. They've cooked up books by showing term loans as crop loans, gone to the bank and taken the loan. So we are doing a forensic audit, and trust me, within 6 months, you should have some banks being taken to court in Punjab on this.
I'll just add to this. I think if you look at investors and if you look at, all the global economists and everybody will say farm loan waiver has so and so problems, all of that. But as I think Haseeb and others said, these are extraordinary. At times we have gone through extreme stress. But I think at a structural, if you look at theoretically, any democracy for it to work, you have to get your wealth creation engine right, and you have to get the wealth transfer engine right. So whether it's farm loan waiver, whether it's your taxation system, whether it's your universal basic income, or even philanthropy and all these are wealth transfer mechanism. Unfortunately, last 25 years, though India has grown and all, we have really not got the wealth creation engine right and the wealth transfer engine right. And we keep on, flip-flopping between the two. And obviously, we need to create wealth. With that, we will do if we can start, stepping up the GDP growth, creating more capital surpluses. But we also have to get some structural answers to how do we do this wealth transfer, not on an ad hoc basis, because an agri loan waiver is an ad hoc wealth transfer. But your taxation system has addressed it up to a point. Maybe UBI is the answer. Maybe there are other answers like Haseeb and other experts are here. But I think as a country, we need to start talking about how do we balance between the wealth creation policies and the wealth transfer policies.
So for shortage of time, let me have this two last questions from each of the panelists. What are the three non-negotiables that you think we need to ensure that India continues to be on the growth trajectory? So Haseeb sir, if you could start. Non-negotiables? Yeah, three non-negotiables, critical, so that it ensures that whatever government comes, whichever government comes, that this three key things have to be persistent with.
I don't know about three, but one for sure, and I'm speaking in a certain context, institutional autonomy. I mean, non-negotiable. Allow people to function in a certain manner.
Is it hinted at BJP?
Sorry, no, it's a general sense. I mean, subversion has happened earlier, subversion is happening now, styles may be different. Some may do it, highway robbery, some may do it with stealth, that's different. Institutional autonomy is something that is sacrosanct, should not be tampered with. I think that's the key thing I would say in today's context.
And one more question I forgot to ask is, what's your view on 2019? Who is going to come?
View on?
2019.
2019, I have no view.
How can that be? You need to have.
So
you are a true politician.
I was just saying, Rashesh, in fact, I mean, I just suddenly see that, things have changed the last 6 months so dramatically that it's surprising. So, I think that it's public mood. I mean, it depends, you're still far away. Changes will happen. So I'm not willing to take a call right now, but I think there is certainly a change, a rather dramatic change. I'm not so thinking about the thing of change, but the speed at which it's happened. That surprises me.
Rashesh.
I think the first one I would say, I will go back to, how do we get the wealth creation done? I think we need to fix our financial system. I come from there, but our current financial system is fairly broken. We have a lot of capital surplus. We can't convert savings into investments. It's, partly banks, partly the way capital markets, all of that. So one important thing is fix the financial system. The second one I would say is address this issue of equality. We can't really be galloping away at 7, 8, 9% growth and have tall buildings in Mumbai and not have some level of equality. The level of inequality that has crept up, not only in our country but all over the world, it is unsustainable. And if you don't address it, it will create breaks in the system in some very undesirable manner. And the third is, I would go back and say, long-term thinking. I think India today, now we are in a golden age. Our economy is large, we are growing well, we have young population, savings, and everything is working for us. We can't think election to election. We can't be thinking, a year at a time. We need a 20-year, and I would like all the political parties to come together and agree on some key things for the next 20 years. Though, as a lot of people said, a lot of political policy, a lot of the economic policies have continued in various governments, we need a formal statement that for the next 25 years, these are the things India will do. Whether it's in farmer, agri, rural area, whether it's industry, whether it's financial sector. We need some things where we have a 25-year horizon so that we can start putting the foundation for what we can achieve.
So your view on the elections?
As I said, I'm the last guy to I have no idea. I think also the way these things are, it's very close and because it's, it's seat to seat also. I think all the pundits are out there. People will be coming out with estimates. But the only thing I'd say is somebody very high up in the government recently told me that election के एक महीने पहले भी हमें idea नहीं है क्या होने वाला है. So I think there is uncertainty, but that is part of the political system. Everybody is prepared, everybody is hardened veteran. But any guesswork is just a guess. I don't think it really achieves anything.
So from a stock market, who is long and who is short on the government?
I have no idea. I think a lot of Indian investors in the last couple of years have actually come to the markets. As you saw last year, FIIs withdrew money and Indian investors have come in. But FIIs are not withdrawing money because of India. It was emerging markets, US dollar getting stronger and all. So I think the problem with India is that most people recognize that on a long-term basis, India is one of the best stories in the world. And we have been. Last 25 years, our GDP has doubled in rupee terms every 5.5 years. We are doubling every 5.5 years. So it's a great story. We have had, 5 governments from Atal Bihari Vajpayee government to both the UPA government to this government. 5 years, stable governments out there. We have had 7% growth, all of that. We are a very stable country, but we don't seem to look stable. We look very chaotic. We look highly volatile, and partly I think it is actual volatility in India. Partly, though I think, I'll get protest on this. Partly I call it the media amplification of the volatility.
That's a convenient ruse. Blame it on the media.
We look highly volatile, and foreign investors and Indian investors get actually put off by the perceived turbulence and the volatility that we have in India. We have to start believing we are a very stable country at heart. At heart, India is very stable. So all this drama that goes on, it just takes away from the long-term story.
Arvind, your...
So, while agreeing with whatever has been said, I would say the topmost requirement is to reintroduce a very strong law and order in the country. I think without order, there can be no economic activity and there can be no investment. So first and foremost, I think the might of law has to be felt once again in terms of order in the society. And all the different kind of people who take law into their own hands and think they can get away with it must begin to recede. That's a very, very critical area which I think any government, whichever is coming or is going to be there, must take into account. Second is institution building, not just maintaining autonomy of the institutions, but I think we need to build a lot more institutions that we have today in a country of our size, both at the state level and at the central level, which develop in their own, kind of autonomy and their own way of doing things. When government doesn't have to intervene in everything from the time you wake up to the time you sleep. I think that is something that we need to move away from. And of course, the third one, and which is going to be very critical for anybody, is to put jobs at the heart of any policy, whether it's political policy, whether it's economic policy, geographical policy, or anything that you need to do.
Ajay,
I think so. We need
no,
to...
you didn't tell me your prediction for 2019.
Sorry?
Your take on verdict 2019.
Oh, prediction for 2009. Let me tell you this anecdote because I'm also a student of political science. When people go quiet, when people don't say anything, you're going to be surprised. When people make a lot of noise, and I'm talking about common man. So there is a lot of quiet happening. Now the surprise can be either way. I don't know which way it will be. But there is going to be a big surprise, there is no doubt.
Ajay.
I'll just say that we need to improve the quality of governance for this nation to move forward. You might have the best policies, but those governing us, if they're not good enough, they're not going to deliver. Everybody has to face officers, small offices, big offices, and including governance and including quality of ministers that we have. They need to be subject matter specialists. I think so. We cannot have people elected making policy. They should be giving a vision statement, and we need better policy. And we need to create jobs, because the only way to save this nation from a civil war is that you've got to get people off the farms by creating jobs for them. Because the amount of people, young people that are coming in with substandard education, it's going to be very, very difficult to keep the feelings suppressed. And things like Farm Loan Waiver act like a safety valve for situations like that. And just on this farm loan waiver, I think so the banks, the government wants to do a recapitalization of banks. If you give money for recapitalization as farm, see, when you give a farm loan waiver, farmer gets nothing. It's just the bank account gets paid for that money. So the farmer's not getting anything in his pocket. So it's the best way of recapitalizing banks. And Sir said that Cooperative banks don't even get a recapitalization. That's the heart of India. The cooperative banks, the panchayats is the heart of the India. We need to get the Gram Sabhas working. If you want the panchayat system to work, the Gram Sabhas don't take place. It's an entry. You know, if you make it compulsory, like a videography of a Gram Sabha, I think so. Democracy will start working in a much better way. So it's small incremental changes that will change the nation. It's not big announcements, big things like GST or big things like demonetization. We don't want to be kicked around like that. We just want small incremental changes which don't get noticed, which are not romantic, which don't make news, and that's what India will change with.
Verdict 2019.
I think wherever BJP and Congress is in direct contest, farmers could vote for Congress, but where regional parties are in play, we do not know where they will vote for other than the BJP.
Shaina, you'll have to first defend on the autonomy part, the social disharmony part.
I'm going to answer all of it if you allow me, and very briefly.
Sure.
So the non-negotiable is clearly corruption. And I think for the first time in the history of India, we have had a non-corrupt government. Second, most voters want stability. And the voter is extremely intelligent. So I'm confident that they will choose a stable government. And, of course, political will. Because if you're going to dilly-dally and not take decisions, then I think that we will continue to see fraud after fraud. And one of those policies in that direction, whether it's the Bankruptcy Code or Insolvency Act or the Fugitive Bill, have been endeavors in that direction. The fact that we have got defunct companies to pay back, probably for the first time, no kind of political insulation has spared anybody. You asked about two questions as they were talking, and I was silently listening. One about employment. I do concede, yes, we have a problem in hands. We have to focus on youth employment, but we only go by registered data. We really haven't gone and bothered to think about the unorganized sector or through skill development, the amount of youngsters who have been able to, on their laptop and using digital media, work out of home, be self-employed as entrepreneurs as well. But do we need to focus on it? Absolutely yes. And as far as the farmers are concerned, previous governments used to only give freebies, subsidies, SOPs. Our government believes in empowerment, whether it is cash-rich crops, soil fertilizers, pension schemes, insurance schemes, loans for farmers' children who do not want to be part of the farming community, or using technologies which come from Israel, better irrigation, all of which at the grassroots level. And you take a state like Maharashtra, yes, I believe that loan waivers are sensitive only as a short-term measure, but if you take policies like Jalyuk Shivar, which have transformed the irrigation in a state such as ours, we have worked. There may be baby steps, but doing away with the middleman, MSP, all of these are steps in the correct direction. And most important question, 2019. So in 2014, BJP came to power with 14.5 crore votes. Today, we have 11 crore members across the length and breadth of this country, and we are the largest political party in the world. So I'm extremely confident that the Indian voter may be silent, but is not stupid, is extremely intelligent, and realizes that they don't want a khichdi where they don't understand what they're eating. They want strong leadership, governance, coupled with stability, and that political will can be delivered by our party.
So the 3 points that you said, will that be part of the BJP's manifesto for 2019?
Absolutely.
And no more jumlas.
And no?
More jumlas.
That may be your way of interpreting it, but I'm sure the policies that have percolated down to the poorest of poor, whether it's the pension schemes, insurance schemes, Mudra, Jan Dhan Yojana, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, and you may feel that they are rephrased, but the difference is you had policies which were never implemented. Here you have policies which have percolated down to the poorest of poor.
Milind, final word.
I mean, firstly, I agree with what everyone has to say, except for Shaina, obviously. But, you know, it's interesting. I have to make a small political point. But I think when BJP is telling this section of society, they're using the bogey of stability to scare you. And they're using the bogey of mandir politics to another section of society. What is very clear to me is that they failed miserably in 5 years. I personally believe all the stuff that everyone before Shaina has spoken about, all of it is true. But as a person who's been a minister as well, so has Haseeb, what hurts me the most is that in 2019, I really wish that the issues that all four of these gentlemen raised were the political issues we were debating today. But unfortunately, India is not outlook business. And the issues that are being debated on the streets of Mumbai, Maharashtra, and India are whether we should have a temple or a mosque in this country. And I personally believe the one single issue that my answer to you would be, is if Indians, instead of temple versus mosque, debate education and healthcare, debate women's safety and jobs, then you'll really make India a developed country.
Thank you, panelists, for that. Verdict 2019, yes.
I'll give you the honest, candid answer, and Rashesh is a very, very dear friend of mine, he knows this. I've been proven wrong so many times that I hate predicting and giving a number.
So you can always say BJP is coming.
No, I'll tell you. Okay, fair enough. BJP is coming. In 2004, just to share with you, in my first election when I was 27 years old, I was all but convinced, and Piyush is a very old friend of mine also, he can vouch for that. I was all but convinced BJP would come to power in 2004. I was proven wrong. 2009, I was reasonably certain BJP would come to power and we'd lose the election. I was proven wrong. 2014, I wasn't sure that BJP would get such a big majority, but I knew that things were going bad for us. I was proven wrong. So what I do agree is, I certainly believe that the sheen has worn off the government. And I feel that when they're debating issues, which I know from BJP friends of mine, that their strategy to appeal to the sort of educated sections are stability is important. And to those who are more emotional, that choose a temple over a mosque, what is certain to me is that there's a lot of economic distress on the ground. Because when you're depending on distractions, then you know something is going wrong. So I think what's important for us as a party is to bring the narrative back to economy, back to jobs, back to foreign policy, back to issues that really impact the common India.
Thank you, panelists, for taking your time out. And on that note, we bring the panel discussion.